Hey, everybody. Welcome back to episode 11 of Untamed Terrain podcast, where we share traversing life's chaos with you.
Yeah, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about keeping kids busy, all their extracurricular activities and keeping them involved and the ups and downs of trying to do so, whether it's financially or time constraints or what do we do with kids to not keep them or not let them be bored, but also not run ourselves ragged
Right.
in the process, either through our bank account or just time in general. Because with 7 kids at home every other week, I mean, that time is pretty precious, right?
It sure is. This episode actually is one that came from one of our kids. We asked the kids what we should talk about, and my middle son, who is 19 years old, said, "Why don't you talk about how you handle extracurriculars with all of us kids?" So that's what led us into this. Where should we start with it?
I think what kind of we had talked about was what did we do when we were young, and I was in sports 24/7, and I don't know if that was my mom's way of like, okay, I can continue to work late if Tommy's at practice and this and that, but growing up with that, it was great. I was completely 100% happy with being football practice, soccer practice on alternating days, and then baseball season came around and it was nothing but baseball. When I became a parent, it was like I had started to see the transition, at least in my world, of baseball going from some holiday 1 or 2 week camps once in a while to a winter league being, kind of evolving. We always played in the summer, we always played in the spring, but then it started to become a year-round process. And I remember asking my dad if I could play in this league. He's like, it was most likely a financial thing because he was a single parent here in Phoenix, raising me on his own. My mom involved, but 187 miles away. So I started to see this transition of as I got into being a parent of all these club teams and all these travel teams, and all of a sudden it's $2,700 a summer for them just to go play baseball. And I'm like, I can't afford that especially as a restaurant manager, starting out with twins.
It's hard to do it for one.
Yeah. And we, started twins 15 months later, our third child was born, and then they came every about 2 years after that. But it's like, all right, and my ex-wife and I decided we're going to let them develop their own interest. What do they like to do? Is it going to be sports? Is it going to be theater, arts, whatever it might be? And arts kind of became the go-to for our kids for a while because it's something they could practice at home. It's something that multiple of them could do together because if there were parts that required siblings or there were parts, whatever it was a little easier for them to kind of get involved in that. Whereas with athletics, you're committed to 2 to 3 nights a week, plus games on the weekend, plus bouncing,
plus paying fees.
Well, yeah, and talk about inflation. The price of equipment now, just baseball bats in general. I think I paid $25, $30 for my first baseball bat. They're $280 now, almost $300 a bat. And so I think the motivation to letting them decide what their interest would be, and then once they reach 10, 11 years old, if they really wanted to go play ball or they really wanted to play football, then that was the time that, okay, we're going to try to fit this into a cycle to where so-and-so just had a season, the next so-and-so has a season, the next one so-and-so's in a play and has rehearsals for 4 weeks and has a show that runs for 3 weeks. Kind of just had to balance it. And with multiple kids, that's how we had to approach it. And there was a lot of regret in me not giving them individual attention to whether it was athletics, the arts. My ex-wife kind of was more involved in, but I did take a liking to it, but not giving them each individually time to, hey, let's go play catch. Let's go throw the football, or let's go, if you want to go to the batting cages, let's do that. And growing up, my dad was always willing to go. I mean, we had backyard games to see who would do the dishes, different things. There was always something athletically involved to keep my interest in it. And the group of friends that I hung around with, built batting cages in their backyard.
So your environment basically nurtured where you went when it came to extracurriculars.
Right.
And the same thing happened with your kids. You were working and their mom was fortunate enough to stay home with them. And so she was able to nurture what spoke to her and was able to help them develop a love for it. My kids were also involved in extracurriculars. I was as well. We've talked about this on a previous episode. I was also an athlete and started organized sports when I was 5 years old and played softball and basketball. And I did do a little bit of flag football, but drew the line when I wanted to try out for my high school team. And my dad indelicately told me that you may be big in 8th grade, but when it comes to 9th and beyond, you are not going to be big enough. So you better be fast. And I just wasn't fast enough. So I went somewhere else. But my 3 boys all played football and my daughter plays volleyball. And it's interesting because none of my 3 boys play football anymore. And so I kind of wanted to segue into that avenue of when do you let it be your child's idea to not play anymore? How do you navigate their laziness as being a complete loss of interest in a sport? Because my daughter loves volleyball and she's really good at it, but she did not want to try out for her junior high team. And it may be lazy of me, but I wasn't going to pay the fee and take her to practices and commit my time for her to be in volleyball if she wasn't committed to it. But I know that she loves it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted to talk about that and where we draw that line.
Yeah, it's interesting because we kind of had the same talk with my middle son going into high school. And he was gung-ho about, at least what I thought, was gung-ho about trying out for basketball and then potentially baseball. And those tryouts came and went and nothing happened. And so, like your point you brought up with not necessarily being lazy about it, but okay, if that's not what you want to do, then I'm not going to force it. But what are you doing instead? What are you doing to pass your time instead? And I open the door to their room and headphones are on and they've got their phone in front of their face. It's like, well, that's not the idea, at least that I had for you. And I don't want you to be stuck in here just not doing anything other than playing games.
That actually, this is totally off topic, but you mentioned that. And I think that that's a big thing that I think a lot of contemporary parents are dealing with right now is children's addictions to their tablets.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that the 3 of our children who are constantly on electronics, they've all started dealing with debilitating headaches in the last couple of weeks. All 3 of them have missed school because of these massive headaches that I personally believe are tied directly to them being tied to their electronics. But anyway, back to
it's I've approached it to telling him, hey, the 3 of you, it's usually my 3 youngest that are all sitting around playing games, and they're usually out in the living room, so they're visible, right? I was like, you guys turn that off, go out to the park.
And they do.
And they do, which has been great. And so that's, I guess, that's a win in a way that it gets, Jet's playing, my second youngest Jet is playing baseball right now. It gets him out. It gets him an opportunity to play some catch with his brothers and hopefully pique their interest in staying outside and eventually trying out for whatever it is. My youngest wants to play soccer. My middle child, who we were just talking about, maybe next year. He's really into working out. He loves his weightlifting sessions at school when they have them.
And he likes the results too.
Yeah, he just sit there. It'll come out, his shirt off or flexing his arms. They'll flex off between him and his older brother because he's taller than him. But I think for me it's because that's the way I was brought up. I was brought up, look, get outside. Don't sit around here. And we didn't have the distractions, the computers and the phones, but still.
Well, and our parents had no problem putting us to work if we were
if
we were being lazy. They were gonna find something.
There's like, oh, I've got something that you can do.
Right.
And they've, it's funny because just this past weekend, I was out working I think it was in the backyard, and came in and saw them all sitting there. I'm like, man, it's such a contrast to me growing up, because if I was inside watching TV, well, my grandfather or somebody else was out working on the yard, the very minute they came into the house would be like, get your ass outside and
Yeah.
start working. And it's different. I don't know. Maybe some of it's, for me, is a control issue, to where if you don't cut things right a certain way, but I guess what I did was, I'll make the piles and let them go up and clean up and do their part and feel like they did put a hand to something.
Yeah. I kind of drawing this conversation back to the point at hand, the presence of online interaction and electronics and entertainment that you can carry around with you has, I believe, inhibited our children from finding activities that are physically demanding and gratifying that they can follow through with. I had mentioned that my kids all stopped doing their extracurriculars. And I actually asked them about this because it's hard as a parent to navigate being the lazy, permissive parent who allows your child to loaf all day long, which I am totally pointing all the fingers at myself here, because they do have a child that is really gifted physically, but just doesn't want to, would rather read books. And not that there's anything wrong with that. No. Watch YouTube, play video games. So the question is how do we hit that balance between being a lazy, permissive parent and being Tiger Woods' dad or Serena and Venus Williams' dad, who push them hard even when they don't want to do it, but end up yielding great results?
Yeah, there's a huge balance there, and I feel like if we can, and we're both in a great situation where we're fortunate enough to work from home, so when the kids do get home, we're available to them. Whereas I know for me especially, I was home alone quite a bit, so I kind of had to figure out how to keep myself occupied. And having these electronic tools at hand definitely leads to the permissiveness of, all right, they're occupied, I can go start dinner, or I can go work on something that I wanted to work on after our actual workday was over. But I think it's really taking the bull by the horns and saying, all right, I'm going to take you to the park, or I'm going to spend the 30 minutes or an hour with you, finding something that you like to do, and I can help facilitate that, and we both enjoy it in one way or another. And I think it's just a matter of, as with any project or with any task, you just have to do it. You just have to buckle down and say, look, all right, today I'm taking so-and-so to the batting cages, or I'm going, with so-and-so to watch them practice, whatever. Whether it's with the kids who are in arts and really dedicated to that, for me, it's kind of like, well, what do I do? What's my role in that?
You found ways, though. When your boys were in Les Mis together, 3 of Tommy's 5 children were in Les Mis, the youth production of Les Mis, and you got right in there. And
yeah, I was able to help out with the set building, and that was fun. That was great. It kept me interested, and I mean, I'm interested in it anyway. But that was easy to do because all 3 of them, they were all on the same schedule.
But you're not having the same enjoyable experience being a coach for Little League as a co-coach.
And we talk about the kids losing interest. It's tough because this is my son's first year in playing competitive baseball. And it's almost like he's really becoming disenchanted with the thought of continuing this. And he's such a talent. Like he's got the best defensive skills that I've seen for someone who hasn't been completely brought up, like spoon-fed all the mechanics constantly. Because I know the parents who have done that. I have friends who own travel teams, and that's been their life, and they dedicated their life to being a coach. I always wanted to do that, and I thought I wanted to do that when I went into college. I was going to be a teacher because I wanted to coach. But yeah, working alongside with this guy, he's been coaching for about I don't know how long, 5, 6, 7 years, and watching the frustration in the kids because there's just this lack of direction with them.
And coaching is a huge thing.
Yeah.
I have mentioned several times that all three of my sons stopped playing football, and all three of them were very talented. My oldest, he's in college now. He was a quarterback and really, really good at what he did. He's tall. He's about 6'3", and has got a great arm on him, and played all through high school with the exception of 1 year. And he stopped playing. And I'm not sure exactly why. There's a couple of factors, I think. My second son, my 19-year-old, started playing football when he was 5 years old, and he's just a powerhouse. He's a badass on the field. He is probably 5'9", but about 270 pounds, raw muscle. He's probably taller than that. He's probably 5'10". Raw muscle. Really, really just strong powerhouse kid. He was a safety, and he was a linebacker. Really good. He was on, kickoff and punt return teams. Really good blocker, really good runner, very fast, very capable. I thought he could go NFL. And I wasn't pushing him because, I want my kids to know that I love them no matter what they choose, and that I don't have expectations for them. And I want them to have the freedom to pivot in their lives if they need to without feeling like they've lost my support or my pride in them. When he was a junior in high school, he stopped playing. And I actually asked him this morning if we could kind of talk about Jake and his situation. And he said it was fine. He didn't like the coaching.
Yeah.
He felt like the coaches, there was a lot of favoritism, and there was too much politic in it. And he didn't want to deal with it anymore. He felt like it was unfair. And so that was one of the biggest reasons he became disenchanted with football. But it wasn't a loss of his ability. It wasn't a loss of his competitive nature or his desire to win or his skill. It was just a loss of passion because of the coaching. My youngest son started playing Pop Warner when he was 8, and he had a really bad experience with his coach where his coach pretty much physically assaulted him on the field during a game. He kept getting holding calls because he didn't get to see much of the pitch and much of the field. And so he ended up getting a holding call that cost the team a touchdown. And so the coach called him off the field, and he went running off the field full truck because he knew that he had to get off the field. And as he ran by the coach grabbed his helmet, his face mask with both hands, and whipped my kid's head around. And I nearly lost it in the stands because, if you can't face mask out on the field, what gives the coach the right to face mask a kid running full tilt at him? And just beasted my son in front of his whole team about this holding call. And, my feelings aside, I told my son's dad that he needed to handle it or I was going to make a scene and embarrass the whole family. But my feelings aside, it absolutely humiliated my son. And so again, it was a failure of coaching. Now, football's a pretty dangerous sport. I think we all know that, notwithstanding the attempts to make it safer for players, is still dangerous. And so I'm not heartbroken that none of them stayed with it, and I certainly wasn't going to push them. His reason behind not playing anymore was he didn't want an injury that was going to cripple him psychologically, emotionally, or mentally for the rest of his life. And I couldn't disagree with it, even if he was super talented.
Yeah, I think, going back to letting the kids find their interest and really nurturing that interest, it's tough because when they lose a lot of the developmental piece, especially when it comes to, and I'm talking about athletics. When it comes to fundamentals, you're trying to teach someone who is 12 years old what a 6-year-old is learning about a game, and I don't mean it in such a basic way, but in a fundamental way where their mechanics are just being developed. They're already 5-6 years behind of the process, and so it's a fine line. You know, I understand why I was able to be in so many different programs. It was because, I was an only child at the time, and it was a little easier to truck one around. So in our situation, giving them, once they find their passion, it's like, okay, how are we going to manage getting let's say all four of them or 4 or 5 of them decide this is what I want to do. What does that look like? How do we make that happen? And I think there's always a way for it to work out, whether it be other teammates getting rides and back and forth. But as far as managing, getting them to that point, it's tough because I've always decided, or I did decide that I didn't want to push him into athletics because I didn't want to be like that dad who's trying to
gets ejected from the games.
Well, not only get ejected from the games, but try to make up for his own shortcomings in different ways by really pushing their child to focus on the things that I fell short on, and being overbearing when it comes to practice, and wearing them out to where they're like, okay, I just don't want to do this because this is you're not making it fun. And so it was I asked my son before the season started. I said, if it works out and they need it, would you want me to coach your team? He was like, yeah. So that was one of my worries, is I didn't want him to feel like, because I was more of the old school mentality where, you talked about an abusive football coach. I don't think we were necessarily abused, but we were disciplined to the nth degree. I mean, I remember tying a game over the weekend, and we came back to our first practice and we ran for 2 hours straight. And
how old were you?
I was in 7th grade. So I was probably 11.
12, 13.
Yeah, 12, 13 years old. And we ran. And this team was undefeated for 2 years straight. And we ran for 2 hours straight. And just, guys are almost throwing up and just gasping for air. And we finally got to the end of the running, and he looked at us and barely pulled us together. He goes, just think if you would have lost. So, but we got results. So that stuck in my head. And the biggest issue now I have with this team that we're talking about, the baseball team, is that there's no discipline. And the kids are all tied up in watching videos on YouTube on how to do bat tricks. So they're bouncing. I'm like, you guys, even if you were hitting 500, there's still no reason for you to do that, because if the guy's hitting over almost 500, he's not doing bat tricks. He's in the cages working on his swing.
Well, and they don't, your team, and you're the assistant coach, so you have marginal growth and marginal influence over what the team does next. Your team hasn't even practiced. They've had more games than they've had practices. And they don't know a lot of the fundamentals, let alone having the bandwidth to go and do the stuff they see the pros do.
So to talk about keeping the kids interested in extra curriculars, what do we do when they decide that or they don't make a choice? What do we do when they decide all they want to do is sit in front of the Switch or their phone and talk to their friends all afternoon?
Geez, I wish I knew the answer to that, because that's what my kids do. Hey, watchers, listeners, if you have an answer to that question, please comment below, because we could use your advice.
And then I think it's to your point, like, to me, there's got to be, to me, it feels like there's a point to where we just got to say, you know what, this is it. We drop the hammer, we enroll them in something, and you're going to this. And you're going to at least stick it out for a season or as a show or whatever it is. And, I think on the artistic side, we haven't had too much of an issue with the kids becoming involved, but it's like keeping them interested in something other than electronics at this point. And this isn't an electronics show or an episode, but that's part of the battle with giving them an extracurricular, because it cuts into their quote unquote social time, which I don't see it as social. They're just sitting there playing games with other friends.
It's a different environment. I mean, their socialization is different than ours was.
So it's I think for us it's a learning curve, especially and dealing with the age ranges that we have.
It's nice because the older kids are a little more autonomous, the drivers.
Yeah, they're doing their own.
We have 3 drivers in the house that can get themselves where they need to go.
My twins are completely involved in, their extracurriculars are covered because they're doing it as part of their schoolwork and shows and whatever else they're doing. pretty proud of them actually for the way they've been handling things. But it's the younger groups, our younger 4 especially, that we're trying to really nudge to
Go find something.
figure out what they want to do outside of their school and their regular lives.
It has to be something they commit to too. It
But
can't
we
just be
didn't.
our ID.
I didn't know when I was that age. I just knew that
Well-
I had to go to practice. So that's kind of like,
But you know, it's we don't want to throw money away, and nobody should throw money away forcing a kid to do something they don't want.
yeah.
But that's really the question. How do you get them to find what they don't want and what they do want if they don't try something?
I think it's a matter of our own involvement too. I think when we are present and we are finding something to get them out to do, whether it's going to a driving range or going out to a park, it's us kind of taking the reins sometimes to really pull them away from their attachments.
And then being present enough to acknowledge when they have natural talent so that possibly it fosters that interest.
Yeah. So just got to be good parents about it, I guess.
Let them know we love them, even if all they want to do is play their Switch or whatever.
Yeah. So, well, great. Glad we had this conversation today. It definitely keeps me on the thought process of, all right, what am I not doing to help guide them?
Yeah. Well, welcome to the episode where we don't have the answer. So please help us. We need your advice.
Yeah.
We thank you for tuning in today, watching or listening, and welcome your comments. And man, help us. Help you.
All right, you guys. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. We'll talk to you soon.